everybody. Welcome to Stories from the Porch. I'm Shelley Glicka, and this is our front porch. Tonight we have Michael Clarkson. He is talking about stories of the Niagara River. His topic is river legacy. So here we go.
Okay. Follow me up the...
Oh yeah.
Thanks for coming. I was going to get my hair cut for this, but I figured I'm supposed to be a riverman, so a little more eccentric look is in. Unfortunately, my two cohorts tonight, Dan Hill and Kip Finn, who are descendants of the Red Hill family, couldn't be here. So they're kind of here in spirit.
Nice.
And here's a new little, we talk about COVID and things to do, things that will come out of COVID, perhaps new professions. Here's a sorry I couldn't be here tonight, Michael, but you know, you can pass along how I love the river. And anyway, nothing to say, Dan? Okay. Ventriloquism, right? Great for ventriloquism. I can't throw my voice.
You can tell.
Yeah.
How did you get so good so quick?
I'm 72. Oh, you mean in general, or?
I just meant at
Oh,
ventriloquism.
I don't know. It was on Facebook. Somebody on somebody's Facebook page, they had this ventriloquist act with a mask on. So I thought, that's great. But, yeah, I think they're doing it like a yuck-yucks or something. Anyway. Okay, anyway, Niagara Falls. Slowly I turned, step by step. One of my loves, and I've had a number of lives, as you know, from those of you who've seen me the last couple of years, 2 or 3 times here with Shelley and Will, and thank you very much again for inviting me, and congratulations on your expansion to 2 nights a week.
Yeah, exciting.
I've told this story a number of times, and I usually have about 80 people here, but they've heard it so many times they decided not to come, and I don't blame them. But this book is about the Red Hill family per se, but about Niagara Falls history and daredevils in general. And a little side issue on this book is I tried to get this book published for about 45 years. Couldn't get a publisher. Went through all the Canadian publishers, the Red Hill family, they got a great story, daredevils, the river rescues, etc., etc. Finally, about 4 years ago, I thought, you know what, I've been peddling this manuscript. I'm not giving up, but I'm just going to give it to like Brock University or University of Buffalo. And my wife, Jennifer, says, why don't you just try Kindle? Kindle is the Amazon online version of book publishing. So I sent a little synopsis. In fact, I've ended up sending the whole manuscript, 80,000 words, which is way too much for Kindle. But immediately after like a couple of days, the Kindle editor said, what a great book. She said, but it's too good for Kindle. I'm giving it on to the publisher of what's called Little A Books in New York City. It's a branch of Amazon. And the publisher of the book said it was the best book he'd read in 10 years. What happened?
Wow.
40 years of rejections, and suddenly it's the best book he's read in 10 years. Another little sidelight was, I had this book originally in the 1960s in manuscript version, not online. It was all like 80,000 words of copy paper in a little book, in a little box. So my wife-to-be, Jennifer, and I, it's about 1970, we went to a hockey game in Buffalo. I don't know why, but I never locked the doors in the cars, and I left the book in the back. By the time we came back from the game, a looter had gone through everything in the car, except, of course, my manuscript. Now that's rejection for you. But I was lucky to catch on with this. Should I be looking into the camera or playing to?
Don't matter.
Doesn't matter. So I was very glad to get this. It gave me a good advance. I got 25,000 American advance. So ended up being, I made probably about 50 grand on that book. And it became the #1 bestseller on Amazon under the category U.S. history for a month. So I don't know what to say, but I don't know what the lesson is there, but I guess I could guess that Americans play up their history more than we do, obviously. Why the Red Hill family wasn't interesting enough in Canada for a book, I don't know. Sometimes I think Americans tend to overplay their history and we underplay it, and my theory of that is the Big Bang. They broke away from England, we didn't, so that's part of it, our English culture. Anyway, I'm going to read you a little bit from this book and see if you agree that it is worthy of that guy's praise. He also made the publisher also made an audio version. Anybody, Patrick, you listen? The first audio book I've ever had was of this, and I was really pleased with the quality of it. Age of Daredevils. First of all, people who've seen this before, what's the faux pas in this? There's a mistake in that image, the cover.
The greenery?
We're all wearing glasses.
The barrel going over the American Falls. Never happened.
No.
And I saw it, and I caught it. They said, you like the cover? I said, yeah, but here's this faux pas. But the cover was so good, and I liked it so much. Yeah, nobody will notice, and it's been proven.
That's why they call it American history.
American history, yeah. It's got to be the American Falls.
They'll take claim for it.
Yeah. Here we go. Watch it. We got 2 transplants here.
I know them though.
Chapter 1, A Day Most Likely to Come. On this cloudless afternoon of August 5th, 1951, Bill listens intently to try to hear her voice, her rumble. He shuts both eyes, asks people around him to please hush a moment, and focuses on his second sense. From this far away, on the edge of a river bordering the sleepy village of Chippewa, her rumble should be faint, a roll of distant thunder from 1.5 miles as the crow flies. But if breezes allow, it will carry across the long, restless water to where he is situated, hiding under a stone bridge. He needs to hear her. Next to him, anchored to shore but bobbing slightly in calm water as he touches its side, is a peculiar vessel designed to take him to the rumble and beyond. The only way to describe it is a homemade rubber barrel of 13 oversized inner tubes, lashed together with fishnet and hope. The rumble, of course, is Horseshoe Falls, and everyone has heard her, been swooned by her sights and legends as well as her sounds. Not everyone, though, is conscious of the fact or admits that much of the beauty and allure of the falls, of the alpha female, is the thrill of being frightened by her beast. One person who does is William Redhill Jr., Bill to his family and close friends. On this day, most likely to come, Hill is preparing to nosedive off the top of the falls in the contraption right out of a Boy Scout weekend that he has christened The Thing. He and his assistants have been forced to conceal the Thing from police, who will try to halt the stunt and throw him in the slammer overnight to protect him from himself and from the hydroelectric officials who would reduce the flow of the falls and ground the Thing on rocks in the Horseshoe Rapids, which gallops above the booming waterway. In other daredevil escapades over the past 5 decades, 2 people have perished in barrels over the Big Cataract, and 4 others have drowned in the great whirlpool below it. Although some others have survived stunts, apparently by the grace of the good Lord. Before there were rocket ships and bungee cords, there were barrels, and people off Main Street to climb into them. A teacher, a pool room operator, a barber, a machinist, a short order cook, a war veteran, and now Bill, whose last job was in an aircraft factory making fuselages for Allied training missions in World War II. The stench of the war is finally dissipating, but people remember, and they are sick of living and dying. It's best these days to leave it there, up to people like Bill. This is the 6th stunt on the river since 1945. During the war, there were none. It's becoming the age of watching others, like in that new trendy invention, television. And you can even keep track of those untrustworthy Reds from the USSR each evening on the boob tube. That's my opening for my book. And that is about Red Hill Jr. And Red Hill Jr. is probably the saddest case of the Hill family. By the way, do have one Hill family member here tonight. It's Melissa Hill Powell. Melissa, you want to give a little wave there? Melissa is the direct granddaughter of Red Hill Sr. Her mother was Edith Hill, one of 3 of the Hill daughters. And there were 4 sons: Red Jr., Major, and Corky. And the unknown brother, I'll talk about him in a little while, he was adopted. His name was Harry Bolts. But the Hill family, I think, at least in the early part of the 20th century, were, you could call them really the first family of Niagara Falls. They had flaws like other families, but they brought a lot of interest to the falls in sort of the second coming in the age of tourism. There was a lot of publicity in Europe and Asia about daredevil feats when Red Hill was either going down the rapids in his barrels, or his sons were trying to go over the falls, or he was rescuing other daredevils. So I think the Red Hill, Niagara Falls owes a lot to the Red Hill family, and I don't think in some ways it hasn't gotten its due. Kip Finn, yeah, here, Kip. Kip Finn was a great-grandson of Red Hill Sr. and the grandson of Red Hill Jr. went over the falls. Just to close up on Red Jr., if Kip were here, he would say that that event, that attempt to go over the falls of the thing, was a suicide mission. I don't think it was that simple. I think it was more complicated than that. Red Jr. had the pressure on the family legend to live up to the old man. Red Hill Sr. was like a hero. He was bigger than life. He never went over the falls himself, but his sons, particularly Red Jr. and Major, felt pressure to outdo the old man. And the only way to do that was to go over Niagara Falls in a barrel and survive and get tremendous publicity. And there was tremendous publicity. That day, Red Hill Jr. in that barrel, in the thing, there were estimates of either 100,000, 250,000 people waiting for him in a barrel at the bottom of the falls. So it was a big deal in those days. Daredeviling today has sort of gone out of vogue. The last daredevil, really, except for Kirk Jones, that was an anomaly, was Nick Wallenda. You remember Nick Wallenda went over on the tightrope?
Mm-hmm.
That actually set a record, I think, for something like 10 million viewers. What was that? You got a heckler in the crowd? Oh, it's rope, yeah. He, it wasn't really a daredevil feat because he had a safety net and a bar on him. He was very angry about it. He didn't want any, he had a family history of the wilderness. He didn't want that, but the Parks Commission would not give any permission to do any daredevil feat unless it was a professional and there were safety measures. So Nick was really one of the last. The last one was Kirk Jones 2 or 3 years ago, Pat. Losing track here.
3 at least.
3. Kirk Jones, 15 or 16 years ago, survived the falls wearing only a winter jacket, believe it or not. He's the only human being besides Roger Woodward who ever survived without any kind of a safety device. And some people thought that was a suicide attempt as well. His buddy was taking a video of him going over the falls, which video camera didn't work, but he missed the rocks and somehow he had a leather jacket underneath the winter jacket, and that somehow absorbed the blow of the water. And he tried to go on a bit of a circus act. He had a circus act after that. Didn't make much money. 12 or 13 years went by, and Kirk Jones figured, well, I'm going to try it again. I survived the first time. This time I'll go in a barrel. He didn't survive in the barrel. He had a big plastic ball, somewhat similar to Red Hill Jr.'s, but it was plastic instead of inner tubes. And apparently had a boa constrictor in the barrel with him. And we don't know how he died. They found him below the falls, but the barrel was seen going over the falls with no one in it. The hatch had opened. My theory is that having a boa constrictor in a barrel in the upper rapids, and which is very rocky, I don't think a lot of people realize the upper rapids can be just as devastating as the fall over the falls. I think the boa constrictor panicked in the barrel, and I think he got out. He tried to get out, and he did not survive without a contraption for the second time. So that's pretty much been it for the Age of Daredevils. The other Daredevils don't go in because of the cost. The cost has been so prohibitive, the court cost. Dave Monday, who went over twice, was it 3 times, his court costs amounted up to about 40 grand. They're charging him because it's always been illegal to go over without Niagara Parks Commission approval. It's always been illegal. Except the cops look the other way. In the days of Red Hill Jr., Parks Commission was saying, we got the Parks Police on one hand, and then we got the tourism people on the other hand. 100,000, 250,000 people at the falls. You gonna take a blind eye to that? Big business. So things eventually got, for lack of a better phrase in our society, politically correct. Probably a better word is civilized. We got more civilized. And so these feats were looked down upon, and that's why I'm here talking tonight about the hills from 100 to 50 years ago. So anyway, that's Red Hill Jr. Just to bring it up to date a bit, Ernesto, who brought me here tonight, we went by the falls on the way here, and it's a Wednesday night. Not a lot of people. I was here on the weekend, and I felt there was a big crowd. I felt the social isolation and the mask wearing was pretty good. I don't know if you guys have been down there lately, but I guess my point is that after COVID, during COVID, Niagara Falls is still a big attraction. People want to come for one reason or another. They want to come and see this water dropping 165 feet. You can argue that, well, maybe Clifton Hill was opened up too soon. There was some incidents on Clifton Hill. I think there was not social isolating there. But I guess my point is, I think Niagara Falls is slowly adapting to whatever it is, phase 2, phase 3. We're doing pretty good. There have been downsides, though, because if you've been following the news, there have been some incidents in the lower gorge in the last month or so, since COVID hit. I think it was phase 1 or 2, but suddenly people wanted to go outside and go down the Glen and go down in the whirlpool, and at least 2 young men went missing. I don't even think their names have been released to the public. You know anything about that, Patrick? It was a 19-year-old, slipped on rocks.
I think they're still looking for him. I think.
Yeah. But I can't trust the media these days. I mean, the print journalism has gone downhill so much, there's hardly any follow-up stories. But my main point on this is that, I'll read a couple of little stories from the last couple of months. June 2020 Global News. 7 different rescue agencies from Canada and the U.S. have been deployed to an area near the Niagara Gorge and Niagara Whirlpool to search for a missing 19-year-old man, according to Niagara Regional Police. Investigators say emergency teams were deployed to the area just after 7 p.m. on Monday night after a call about a male in distress near the Glen and the Niagara River Parkway. Upon arrival, the police learned that a group of men that one of 4 hikers stopped to take photos and slipped on a rock and fell into the river. This is happening quite a bit down there. I don't know if you guys go into the Glen by the golf course. That's fairly well controlled. But people get more curious and they drift towards underneath the aero car and towards the whirlpool. And there's a lot of slippery rocks there. And it's not really for fishermen, fisherwomen. It's kind of dangerous. I used to go down there with Wesley Hill, who would have been Melissa's uncle, right? Red Hill Jr.'s, one of Red Hill Jr.'s sons. He was the only one of the 4 boys, actually 5 if you include Harry, who didn't get involved with stunts. He rescued a lot of wildlife. He rescued people down there. And in the 1970s, I used to do a lot of newspaper articles. He would phone me up overnight and say there's an accident or suicide victim in the gorge. So we'd go down there to the whirlpool, where the tourists aren't allowed, but we'd go down on ropes just south of the whirlpool. We'd park at, I don't know the name of the motel down there, but we'd park at the motel, we'd go over the wall, which would be about 300 meters south of the whirlpool. We go down ropes and go directly down to where the bodies would come up by the whirlpool. That's very dangerous, but since I moved back to Niagara Region a few years ago, I noticed that whole rock face is gone now. You wouldn't see that from the top of the parkway, but that whole rock face is gone. You can't get down that area. But my concern, and the Parks Police concern, is that too many people go into the Glen and they drift towards the whirlpool from north to south. And there was another story here about the number of people who were ticketed this year. There were so many people after COVID, after phase 1 or 2, went down there and they had the cabin fever. I think there was something like, Niagara Parks Police issued 31 tickets and 50 verbal warnings Saturday to people disobeying posted signage in the Niagara Glen. Don't get too close to the water. So there's that up to date. Anybody go down there anymore to the Glen?
Not
Beautiful
this year.
spot down there.
It's beautiful down there, but not this year.
It's not safe, no. Let's talk a bit about Red Hill Senior here, the old man. And I'm going to take you back about 4 months when Kip Finn and I went to the Parks Commission to try to get some money or a statue for a statue of Red Hill Senior somewhere in the parkway, perhaps near the whirlpool. And Kip was very instrumental, as I said, in cleaning up garbage in the whirlpool. Not only bodies come around the bend and water levels are going up and down all the time in the whirlpool for hydroelectric purposes. 75% of the water is taken at night when there's no tourists around, and 50% of the water is taken when the tourists are there. So we never see 100% of the water going to the falls. But what that water level does is that when they take 75% of the water at night, that water level drops in the whirlpool. So anything going through the whirlpool comes around in eddies, including bodies of accident victims, including all kinds of plastic bottles from tourists. And when then dawn comes, the hydroelectric people are not allowed to take that much anymore. They're only allowed to take 50%. So the water levels start coming up again. And everything was in the whirlpool and the eddies there drifts out right into the middle of the whirlpool. So every year you've got hundreds, perhaps thousands of plastic bottles. And if you look from where the aero car is down, you can see all the garbage in the eddy there. Well, Kip Finn, who only 4 years ago realized he was a Hill, his family kept him from the Hill legend because Red Hill Jr., when he went over in the thing, he had just broken up with his wife. And I think that was one of the reasons he went over. Unlike Kip thinks it was a total suicide. And it may be partly true.
My mother thinks the same thing.
Your mother Edith thought the same thing. Because, and as I understand it, their argument was, if anybody knew the river and the dangers of the river at that time, it was Red Hill Jr. So yeah, you can make an argument that first of all, he went over in a contraption of inner tubes, which weighed less than he did. He weighed 150 pounds. Here's the mechanics of this. You're in the upper rapids being banged around, and that hatch opens. The thrust forward, you weigh more than the barrel, you're gone. You come out of the barrel. And he didn't make it over the falls. Red Hill I think he was dead before he went over the falls because of that contraption. So there's an argument on that side that he should have known that. It must have been a suicide. But I think it was more complicated than that. And if it was a suicide, there were a lot of complicated factors. His wife had just left him, taking the daughter away. The daughter became Kip Finn's mother. He felt the family pressure. He was out of work. He thought that it would give him a lot of money, all the publicity, blah, blah, blah. He could go on a tour maybe. Finally, one of the Hills make some money. Never happened, of course, because he died. Kip Finn's mother, who was the daughter who was whisked away from him, kept Kip away from that family legend. He did not know. He had all this legend, and he's now in his, I don't know what he's, about 60 years old, in his 50s maybe. Did not know about this till like 4 years ago. When he found out, he just threw his heart and soul into the whole legend. He goes down 3 or 4 times a year to the whirlpool, cleans up all the garbage at his own expense, pushed the Parks Commission to get a real nice plaque about the scow 100 years later, because his great-grandfather, Red Hill Sr., rescued those 2 men off the scow. And this day, what I'm going to tell you about with the Parks Commission, he and I went to the Parks Commission to try to get a statue of Red Hill Senior somewhere in the park, because I think he's one of the legends of Niagara Falls. And this is the way I put it. I don't usually do this, and I'm not talking behind the Parks Commission back, and they haven't officially come back to us and said, we're not going to do it. But I know one thing, the week I did it was the week that Mayor Diodati came back from a trip, and he thought he had the virus. So I'm thinking, I'm standing here trying to get $150,000 from them for a statue, and the economy is going to tank. This is about the worst time you could ever get for a project like this, and I understand that. So I don't know what's going to happen to the statue project, but I do know that Kip got more than 1,300 signatures on a petition, so that's not a small thing to get the statue. Anyway, with me today are Kip Finn and Dan Hill. This was several months ago. Proud grandsons of William Red Hill Sr. Several times a year, in cooperation with the Parks Commission, Kip goes down to Niagara Glen to pick up garbage and debris floating by the whirlpool. Dan is also riverman and the son of the late Wesley Hill, who carried on Red Sr.'s bravery and community service around the falls. This is a little note myself. My father, Fred, was a lead carpenter and electrician for the Parks Commission. Bet you didn't know that, did you? In the 1960s and 70s. I have written hundreds of newspaper articles about the river for the Review, the Standard, the Toronto Star, along with 2 books and a third along, which is on the way, which is about rum running along the river in the Prohibition. The 2 statues that people think of concerning this area, anybody got any idea? 2 statues.
Tesla.
Yes. One goes back to the Big Bang Theory, where the United States got away from Isaac Brock. Big Brock. The 2 statues that people think of concerning this area are Tesla and Brock, who brought peace to Niagara. And now we think of it as fitting that one be constructed for William Red Hill Sr., who brought tourism to Niagara Falls in a big way in the economic ups and downs of the first half of the 20th century. Some people think of Red Hill as a daredevil, but he did so much more to boost Niagara Falls. In fact, he never attempted to go over the falls himself in a barrel, which he called a fool's game. He was the face of Niagara Falls in the first half of the 20th century. To this day, tour guides tell the stories of his life-risking feats. Thank you, Niagara Parks Commission, for the plaque in 2018, which mentions Red's heroic efforts in saving 2 men from the scow in 1918. And Melissa, your mother, was there that day. She was a witness to the scow. She was only a kid, but she obviously told you that story. She told me that story as well. It must have been something.
3 years old, not even 3.
Yeah. Beatrice, their mother, brought them, because it went on all night, this rescuing the men from the scow. He brought the family down to watch the end game, and he rescued the 2 men. Red Sr. was also a war hero at the Battle of Vimy Ridge, and injured so badly he was sent home to die. Doctor told him, I hope you're not going home to a place what's damp or wet. Oh no, it's Niagara Falls. Because he had problems with his lungs. He was gassed by his own men. Accidentally, the mustard gas, the Canadians were using mustard gas. I guess it's illegal at the time, and the wind blew back in the wrong way. And he was a sniper on the no man's land with a little pea shooter. And they thought he was going to die. But instead, he brought life back to Niagara with headlines across the world about his exploits. He received more life-saving awards from the Canadian government than any man in history, a Royal Canadian Humane Association Bravery Award. For rescuing his little sister in 1896 from the burning home, in 1912 for rescuing 23 tourists from the ice bridge disaster below the falls, and then for the scow rescue. But most of his rescue work was done with little fanfare, and he saved countless swans and other wildlife from the river. To this day, the swans, when there's fog, they get disoriented. They're sitting atop of the falls in the river, they get disoriented, and the next thing you know, bang, they're down, and their wings get badly injured. And Red Jr. and Wesley, even I went down there once time. And
Let me tell you a story about swans going over.
and you are, sir? This is Ernesto
Swami.
Reinhardt.
You can call me Swami.
Okay, Swami. Swami worked for the Niagara Falls Fire Department for many years, so I'll allow this.
Back in the days, my grandfather on those foggy nights used to go down to the Maid of the Mist and on the dock with a 10-foot bamboo pole, big burlap bag. And not only did the swans come over, but deer would come over, or geese would come over, ducks,
Wow.
because it was those animals up above the falls had no idea, and they would drown, and they would all come into that spot. And I can remember as a kid, we'd have to clean them, and he had cabins on Kitchener Street, and he would bring burlap bags of swans and geese and ducks, and we'd be up all night plucking them, and then we ate duck and swan.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And I gotta tell you, swan is delicious.
Did you get all that? Now, where was I? Thank you,
Wow.
Ernesto. Yes. And Red Sr. recovered 177 bodies of accident and suicide victims, which was appreciated by their families for giving them some closure. Red Hill was a family man. Along with his wife Beatrice, he raised 7 children and an adopted child, and he operated the largest fleet of taxi cabs in the city. Construction of a statue would bring about more publicity in newspapers, television, and social media. From 1905 to his death in 1942, he did all of this community service as a volunteer. The only money he received was from small amounts from coroner's fees to recover bodies. When I used to go down with his son Wesley, we got $75 a body, and we gave it back to the coroner, and we dealt with it that way. He received no money from the city or the Parks Commission. We can imagine today the salary he would get from doing the work of firefighters, police, and public relations people. And yet the hero of Niagara died broke. His wife did not have enough money for a proper gravestone. In your wisdom, Niagara Parks Commission, we hope you see fit to raise a statue to this great man of the past, one of the bedrock founders of Niagara Falls as we know it today. And I think the best thing I like about Red Hill Sr., he was one of us. He was a working class bloke. And I don't think, although he loved danger, he loved the excitement, I don't think he did it so much for the publicity as perhaps some of his sons later on. Any questions about the Hill family? I've still got some more stuff on them, but maybe in a little while, Melissa will talk a little bit about your mother, if you want. If you're not, as I said earlier, if you're not here by that time comes, I know you don't want to talk. It's okay. There's no pressure. Let's talk about Beatrice Hill. Beatrice Hill was the wife of Red Hill Sr. You talk about somebody who had to have courage. It had to be her. Her husband and sons were going down to the river every day, and she didn't know if they were going to come back. He was lucky to marry her. Beatrice Hill. She used to say, they say it's a great river, and it is. It takes more than it gives. Beatrice blamed the river in one way or another for the death of her husband, Red, and her sons, Red Jr., Corky, and Major. After Corky's death in 1952, she published a poem in the Niagara Falls Evening Review, as it was called then. Here was her poem. A prayer that was in vain. I had 4 sons I loved so much. I prayed for them night and day. Then on that fatal day, August 5th, 1951, Red Jr., I prayed to God to guide him, but my prayer was in vain, for God called my oldest son away. That left me with only 3, and my prayer was not heard on April 11th, 1952. God took another son away from me, Corky, and left me with only 2. Now I pray with all my heart that God will hear me and will not at all lose another in 1953. Sadly, she did lose another. Major Hill, who died in a police cell, and we're not sure why. I'm not blaming the police at all. We'll get into this a little later, but anyway, I'll get into Major later. But my point is that this poor woman, wow, she was the toughest one of the whole family, I think, in some ways. Beatrice Victoria Clark was named after British royalty Queen Victoria and Princess Beatrice. She liked to tinkle the piano and sing in her mother's home, but she kept the legs covered whenever company came. She kept the legs of the piano covered. She didn't want it said that another tradition was out the window. Boy, have times changed. She tried other things to express herself. By the way, this is from my book. I'm reading my book. She tried other things to express herself, dabbling in softball, and I think Melissa's mother played softball too. Oh, okay. Read my book. You may find it. She played softball with the lads and smoking one cigarette after a game, but she knew her place in those days as an attractive brunette, a devout Anglican who scrubbed bathrooms and carpets at city hotels. Beatrice's father died young, and her mother was sickly. They owned a bakery in St. Catharines and had 5 other children, 2 boys and 3 girls. Valentine's Day in a blizzard was as good a time as any for a riverman to get married. William Redhill and Beatrice Clark could have been doing any one of romantic things on Friday, February 14th, 1911. Later that year, Beatrice lost her first child. She wept and confessed to Red that, as a girl, she had accidentally swallowed drain cleaner, which had burned her throat and stomach lining. After consulting with doctors, she was afraid it would affect her ability to bear children. And so they adopted a baby from Kitchener, Ontario, Harry Bolts, who would eventually help his father retrieve suicide bodies from the river and became the best swimmer in the family and swam at the C&E with Olympic gold medalist Johnny Weissmuller. Does that name ring a bell? He was the original Tarzan. And he was a lifeguard at Waverly Beach in Fort Erie. But it turned out Beatrice could have children, and she had 6 of them: William Jr., Edith Lloyd Major, Helen, Wesley, and Margaret. But there were good family times. Beatrice and Red Sr. were excellent roller skaters and often went dancing with millionaire Harry Oakes. Does that name ring a bell?
Right.
And his wife. Harry Oakes was actually, Red Hill was actually Harry Oakes' gardener. And Harry Oakes had his own private golf course. But he used to get so frustrated on this one hole, his ball kept going in the sand. So instead of changing his tactics to go around the hole with his ball, he had Red Hill Jr. take out the sand trap. That's the end of that. So anyway, yeah. On some summer evenings, the foursome, Harry Oakes, his wife, and the Hills, went dancing at the Erie Beach Casino in Fort Erie, in Hill's big Buick McLaughlin, a flagship for his taxi fleet. As he often did when in company, Red would wear a sharp navy blue blazer with embroidered crest of the Royal Canadian Legion, Branch 53. Still here, as far as I know, Branch 53. A waistcoat, a tie pin, and shiny shoes. For a night dancing to the Tommy Dorsey Band, Beatrice would dress simply yet compellingly, with a white Gibson Girl top and an artificial rose attached to her necklace. There would be little makeup, but occasionally she would let her brown hair down. They looked anything like Mr. and Mrs. River Rat. Beatrice died in 1974, outlived her husband and all her sons except for Wesley. Wow. What some women had to go through in those days. Major Hill, he was the one I mentioned was not dead when Beatrice did that poem. I think, unlike some other people in Niagara Falls, Major got a bad rap. I'll read you a little bit of Major's biography. Next to the river, the Army was Major's great passion. He followed his father, Red Sr., as a member of the Lincoln and Welland Regiment, guarding ships along the Welland Canal. In 1939, he married a young woman he met at the regiment, Margaret Peggy Hanna, a nice girl, fun-loving and personable. They had one child, Molly. Unfortunately, Molly couldn't be here tonight. She lives in Fort Erie. Peggy liked Major partly because he was a nice guy and a gentleman who would carve dollhouses for children. Major was a marksman on the shooting range, usually hitting 5 out of 5 bullseyes from 50 yards with a .303 Lee Enfield service rifle. By 1941, Private Hill was shipped overseas with the Lorne Scots Regiment, fighting in major skirmishes in France and Casablanca. He was wounded several times, once by a hand grenade, which he lobbed over a fence to save himself and several comrades. In a postcard to his mother from England in Christmas 1943, Major wrote, "Please don't worry. Received the pepperoni, powdered eggs, and dried bananas." Can't imagine what shape they were in by the time he got them. I'm tickled pink. As always, your son, cheerio. By 1944, Major had many missions behind enemy lines with parachute jumps. He had always been fascinated by free falling, and that became one of his allures at the falls. He used to say, "Only parachutes know why the birds sing." I love that quote. Only parachutes know why the birds sing. In a letter to Peggy from Italy that year, Major wrote, "I'm waiting for a glass of Labatt's, Legion 51, to shoot the well-known BS." Major scaled a mountain in Italy and saw some of his friends killed beside him. But he had courage and was just as afraid of daddy-long-legged spiders as he was of the Nazis. One night, he struck a match in an old Italian castle and found them crawling around him before blowing them all away with a flamethrower. It's like killing a fly with an atom bomb. Major came home to Niagara with several injuries, including shrapnel in his leg, and he could not get steady work or proper housing. Bored stiff with no outlet for his nervous energy, Major told me, "Excitement, that's all there is in life." Major was a brave man, said Ken Sluggett. Sluggett was he was a nephew of Red Hill Sr., himself an army sergeant in England. I always admired Major for that. When he came home, Major had problems with alcohol and prescription drug consumption, and he had a leg amputated. I think that he suffered from a type of post-traumatic stress disorder, but of course in those days we did not understand that, and too harshly judged war veterans. Major's one attempt to go over the falls in 1950 ended when his barrel got caught in a hydro pool above the falls and he had to be pulled out. He successfully rode the lower rapids in barrels more than any other man, 5 times. I posted something like this on Facebook once, and Melissa had a comment below it, and she said, "I love Major. He used to call me Liza Jane," is that what it was? "And brought me little presents."
Yeah,
To which
he'd show
Dan-
up at our door.
Sorry?
He'd show up at our door at night and just come for company.
Oh, yeah. He was lonely. Yeah. And where are you, Dan? Oh, there you are. Dan Hill, he said Major used to whack me with his wooden leg. Okay. Anyway, Major, I'm not going into details, but Major had prescription drug and alcohol problems, and I guess he lost, in society's eyes, he's lost his reputation, he lost his credibility. He was in the police cell off and on, and that's where he died in 1971 in the police cell. They had an inquest, and it was not determined how he died. It was probably something with his body was worn down. He had one leg left. I think the drugs and the alcohol had worn down his immune system, and that was it. He wanted to become the first one-legged man to go over the falls, but that never occurred. And still to this day, I feel badly for him and his legacy. But as Melissa said, he was a nice guy. Got caught up in the legend. Got caught up in an awful war. Came back to a society with, even in Vietnam, society did not understand PTSD. Finally, thankfully, to this day we do. But what they used to call it, shell shock. I just had shell shock, they'll get over it. No, they don't get over it. Norman Corky Hill. He was the second youngest of the Hills, next to Wesley. Norman Corky Hill did not get involved in daredevil stunts like the other brothers. Although in 1945, he swam across the river at the base of the American Falls. When his mother pleaded with him to leave a job at the Maid of the Mist, he got a job at the Hydro Project to build a tunnel, the first tunnel under the city, one of the first tunnels. But on Good Friday, 1952, just his second day of work, a stone 3 inches in diameter came hurtling 350 feet down a shaft, went right through his hard safety helmet, and he was dead at 28. And as I remember it, Melissa, your mother was there in the hospital when he came in. She didn't know it was him. They brought somebody in a stretcher covered in blood. and she didn't know it was him. And I guess if you're a riverman, that's an awful, awful way to die. Corky had risked his life for animals as well as people. Once he suffered severe brush burns when he was lowered 125 feet down the slippery gorge on a rope by Junior to save a cocker spaniel which had fallen into the gorge. In a suit and tie, he could have been an apprentice banker. Corky was courageous away from the river as well. Classmate Nancy Reynolds, who became a reporter with Niagara Falls Review, remembered Corky as a boy in school. He was my first champion, she said. He beat up a kid who was picking on me. Like most of his family, Corky was mild-mannered. With his handsome face and wavy, reddish-blonde hair, he was attractive to the ladies. He was such a good roller skater and devoted husband to his wife Joyce, he refused a job as an instructor in New York City because it would have meant he would have had to skate with another woman. The Hills were gentlemen, and Wesley, who I know the best, was also a gentleman. He did not attempt any stunts. He didn't attempt to swim the river. He saw what had happened to his brothers. He saw the toll it took on his father. He said he would never get involved with helping Junior with that thing. And so the weekend that Junior was going to go over, he went fishing up north. But that night before, he said, I can't do this. He said, I got to be there. My brother's going to die. I got to be there. So he came back, and sadly he was there along with Major and Corky to watch his brother die over the falls. But Wesley was very charitable. He was a rescuer of wildlife. He got me in the movie Superman 2. If you see that movie, I'm in there for 9.75 seconds at the brink of the falls, right next to Christopher Reeve playing Superman, and holding hands with Wesley Hill's daughter, the redhead Diane. She was my bride in the movie Superman 2. Wesley was the safety guy for that movie. And we became good friends, along with his sons, Dan and Doug. And as I said, we used to go down to get the bodies. There was an accident with the helicopters. There were several routes to get bodies up from the gorge. The route today is the two routes. The jet boat will go get them at the whirlpool, and I think the helicopters still go down there. But in the 70s, when I was helping Wes, there was an accident with one of the helicopters, and the insurance became so much, the helicopters would not go down on that pad. There's a pad there. As I said, don't go near the whirlpool, so you shouldn't be seeing the pad anyway. But there's a pad there where the helicopters can land. Anyway, that was out for a few years, so we had to go down. We had to bring the bodies back up in body bags. We'd have to go down in the dark. And Wesley knew every nook and cranny, and I couldn't really swim. He had me walking along ledges on that gorge. We'd have to go down in the dark because, again, the water levels, as soon as they come up, those bodies are going to float out to the whirlpool, and then you got to wait till the next morning. So we go down there, and it was kind of gruesome, but I quickly learned the bodies didn't look human anymore. They didn't. They were so bloated and so disfigured by going over the falls that they didn't look human. So I was able to deal with that. And I don't know how we got them up the gorge. We had to carry them up, but we did. And I learned to really appreciate Wesley and respect him and his family. And until Kip came along, he and Dan really were the last of the Niagara Rivermen. I mean, I don't really consider myself a riverman. I still go down there. I wrote that book, so I know something about the river. But I guess it's gone out of vogue. Society's changed. I said there's no daredevils anymore. At the river, there's no daredevils because of the costs are just so prohibitive with the getting fined for a penalty for the stunts. So, in fact, I'm not sure why, but there's not really any daredevils left per se, besides Nick Walenda. Remember Evel Knievel? He used to get away with some stuff. Anybody got any theories on that? In society, there's hardly any daredevils left.
What about Awful Knaffle?
Evel Knievel. Who?
Awful Knaffle.
Is that like a cartoon character?
No, that was I think I believe that was his cousin,
Oh,
who was also a daredevil.
okay.
Little didn't make it like evil. He was awful.
But even then, we're going back decades.
He was an awful. Don't believe me.
I'm not trying to.
I'm gonna.
Google it.
That's it. Google it. I'm getting older, so I have some problems with my prostate. So I go to the urologist and Tiger Foot. This is way off topic. It's got to do with
Look here
water.
more.
So I go to the urologist on, I can't remember the name of the street, there's a little medical building. I said, I think I've got prostate problems. You know what he told me? Google it. You're supposed to be a urologist. That's why I'm here. Google it. Oh. I Googled it. It actually helped. I ended up, just to finish that story, I ended up with some beta blockers, and my prostate's been fine. Boy, it's like it changed my life. Thank you. I get up, but I gotta pee. I'm not getting up. Where was I? Boy, I'm really off track here. How long do you want me to go on for?
As long as
What
you
are the
More
like.
medical problems we should hear about.
Not that I'm willing to share in public. What do you got me to? Like 7:45, 8 o'clock? It's
Yeah,
only-
we're on 51 minutes, so it's just past 7:30.
yeah.
Around
Around
7:20.
7:20. Yeah.
Just a couple of notes about people going over the falls. Here's what they said about going over the falls. They went over the falls in Barrow. Annie Taylor, she was really the heroine of Daredevil. A woman, first person who went over the falls was a woman. 1901, she went over in a whiskey barrel. Here's what she said. If it was my dying breath, I would caution anyone against tempting the feat. I prayed every second, except for the few moments after the fall when I was unconscious. I was whirled about like a top. I felt that all nature was being annihilated. When I went over that fall, I fancy I lost my senses for a minute. I would not go over that fall again for $1 million. Poor Annie tried to make some money on it, but she didn't have much personality. In fact, the only daredevil who made any money on going over the falls was a guy called Bobby Leach. He went over in 1911 in a glorified septic tank with the help of Red Hill. Maybe we should have a GoFundMe for my medical problems. No, I'm fine. Anyway, Bobby Leach went over in a glorified septic tank. It was metal. And he went on a tour of Europe, and he made some money. Unfortunately, he went down under. He went to Australia, New Zealand, and poor guy slipped on a orange peel, and he developed gangrene and died. So he survived the falls and died of slipping on an orange peel. Anyway, Bobby Leach said of when he was buffeted in the barrel in the upper rapids, he said, over the falls, I went head first. It seemed like a long way to the bottom, and yet I held my breath. I could tell when I went way down under water, and the barrel came up like an express train. Dave Munday, one of the last ones in 1985, he lost consciousness at the bottom. He said, I had no idea it was so violent. There was this very strong force, one I've never experienced, and the feeling of claustrophobia. Being locked in that barrel was frightening. Yeah. I thought about it very briefly.
What were they thinking?
What were they
Right.
thinking?
They didn't think it was going to be so violent? Are you kidding me?
Watch the water going over, right? I mean, even from here, when I can hear the falls,
Can hear the falls.
you know, sometimes they're
Oh, yeah.
quite loud and it just sounds so turbulent from here. Yeah.
My next book was an online book, Kindle, and it's called The River of Lost Souls. It's about a personal look about suicides over Niagara Falls. It's been an interest of mine. I talked about it here last year in more detail, but I'll go into it a little bit. Actually, I'm just releasing a documentary short, 30 minutes long. It involves the hills as well. It's a short film I'm releasing to film festivals. It's called At the Brink, Personal Look at Suicides over Niagara Falls. And one person I have to thank right now before I forget, who helped fund this documentary, was a chap named Richard Meyer. And Richard, if you're watching in New Zealand, and you probably are, thank you very much. Richard Meyer was the grandson of A.N. Meyer. We all know
Oh,
about that.
wow.
Yeah, famous educator.
And a good friend of mine.
Good friend of Patrick Sirianni, who's just lost 40 pounds. We're not going to get back into that. Good for you, Patrick.
I worry about Richard. That's all.
Yeah. Richard is living in New Zealand. He became a gemologist, right, Richard? An entrepreneur. He is an motel owner. He's going to come back to Niagara Falls hopefully next year, and we're talking about writing a book about his adventures. Interesting guy, and thank you for funding my project. I'll talk a little bit about it. It's a sad subject, suicides in Niagara Falls, but I think there's hope because if we bring it up and talk in terms of mental awareness of mental health issues, I think it's a positive spin. Sadly, we don't know how many people go over anymore because police about 7 or 8 years ago stopped reporting suicides over Niagara Falls. Unless there's something really big, we don't hear about it. So there's probably every year there's like 12 or 15 go over the Horseshoe Falls, but since COVID, who knows, maybe less. Anyway, to back up a bit on that, how I started on this was, that's me. Actually, I was in People magazine. This is a sketch done by an artist friend of mine, S. Lou Routley. Anybody know her?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Nice artist. She sketched me and a friend of mine who was called Robert Billings, and he was an artist. We grew up together in Fort Erie. And we were, at the time, what you'd call geeks. Now you call kids who are different nerds, right? Does it still hold up? Nerds? Nerds are video game players. Anyway, we were different. We wanted to be writers. We both wanted to be writers. We both had this fascination for Niagara Falls. And when we were in school at Mather Elementary School, there was a daredevil called Nathan Boya, William Fitzgerald. He used the name Nathan Boya in 1961. He went over in a rubber ball. We thought, oh my God, what would it be like to go over in a rubber ball over Niagara Falls? And we sort of put that aside, and we lost track of each other till the mid-'80s. And then I found out that Robert was an international poet. He'd become a writer. At that time, I was just starting to peddle this book. You know the story about that. So I hadn't had a book published then, but I was a writer interested in Robert. My God, Robert, we both want to be writers. You made it. I didn't make it. Then I read some of his poems, and there was a lot of morose topics, depression in his poems, and he was depressed. And we had some talk about that. And we talked a little bit about how do we share our hurt. And I've had a lifelong battle with depression myself. My family's had a history of it. It wasn't until about 20 years ago, in my 50s, I started taking depression pills, antidepressants. And so I could relate to what Robert was telling me. Unfortunately, a year after Robert talked to me on the phone, he went missing. And his wife said he's probably gone over Niagara Falls, committed suicide. He had broken up from his wife, had a fascination with the falls. He wrote a poem kind of describing about how he would commit suicide over Niagara Falls. And at the same time, of course, here comes the riverman, Michael Clarkson, and Wesley Hill. My friend has gone over Niagara Falls. Robert Billings has gone over Niagara Falls. So we went down to get a body. We saw a body in the whirlpool, and it seemed to match the description. If I recall, he had an orthopedic shoe on. We couldn't see it properly from a distance, and it was in the daylight. So again, the water was up. We couldn't get it. We couldn't get it to the whirlpool, and so it went around and around. And the currents down there are not always as predictable as they make them out sound to be. They don't always come back. The bodies don't always come back in the eddy by the whirlpool. Sometimes they drift over to the American side, and they found Robert's body about a week later out in Lewiston, Queenston, Lewiston area. So that was very sad, and but there's some hope in this story as well, in the awareness of mental issues and suicide. And I found, ironically, a couple of years ago when I was doing this Kindle book, The River of Lost Souls, I found his girlfriend, Robert Billings' girlfriend, called Sharon Bird. And again, ironically, as I'm releasing this film to film festivals, she's releasing a new book of Robert's poems, of which is included 10 poems which he never had published. Some of his old works and some of his new poems are going to be published. I think it's a publisher in India, but that's going to be distributed, and I feel really good about that. And this side of the mental health issue will also be told in a smaller way, I guess, in her book. So, yeah, mental health, depression, still big things with society. Unfortunately, I think for the goodness of us all, that we're talking about them finally, and the stigma is not much as there as it was before. I think the stigma of depression is still there. Thank you. I'm glad about that. But just to give you a bit of background, I think since the 1800s, and there's been stories, I have a website called newspapers.com, so I can look back in the 1800s and see stories about Niagara Falls. There's been 3,000 people kill themselves over Niagara Falls. 3,000! It's about 25 to 30 a year over both falls. That's what we can count. Dan Hill, he's been down there more than I have. He thinks a lot of them either are not reported or we just don't know. They go over in the middle of the night. They're missing people from Miami. Who knows? They never find their bodies. If they go over in the nighttime, the chemicals in the body are changed in cold water, and they don't come to the surface. They go to the bottom. They may never come up. People may never find them. So who knows how many people do it? My best guess is 25 to 30. And the police, as I say, stopped publishing suicides because they thought they would stop so-called copycat incidents. It worked in New York City subways, where in New York they had a lot of suicides in the subways, and they were always published in the papers, and they stopped publishing them, and I think there were fewer. But Niagara Falls seems to have a bigger allure to it than a subway suicide, a bigger attraction to it. You can't stop, you can't put a plug on that. People are always going to know Niagara Falls is there. And there's always an attraction. I mentioned I was in Superman 2, and I was filming for 2 or 3 days beside Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder, who played Lois Lane, the Canadian actress. And we had talks about the falls, and she said, between takes, she kept being drawn to the water and feeling like she wanted to jump in. Please, somebody stop me. She never really said that, but that's how she felt. I immediately thought of Marilyn Monroe, who did a film called Niagara about 20 years before that. She said the same thing. She felt drawn to the water when she was filming that, with Major Hill actually was a safety man for that film. What do Marilyn Monroe and Margaret Kidder have in common? They both committed suicide. Not by going over the falls, but with prescription drugs. So my point is, if you're susceptible to depression and to suicide, a place like Niagara Falls with that rushing water, for one reason or another, it draws you in, and it's accessible. In my documentary, I have a mental health expert by the name of Ellis Katzoff. He was CEO at Pathstone in Niagara Falls. He's retired now. But he said, Niagara Falls, if you're depressive, if you're suicidal, it's almost like, and you live in the area, it's almost like having a gun in your home. A lot of people kill themselves with guns. Niagara Falls is there. And I think that was the case with one of the 3 people I knew who killed themselves over the falls. Robert Billings was only one of the 3. The other one was a musician. And the second one was Wayne Campbell's daughter, the counselor, Katie Campbell. Helga Campbell was a principal, and Wayne is still a Niagara Falls City Councilor. Katie Campbell killed herself less than 10 years ago, I guess. But Niagara Falls was there. She was at Dufferin Islands, and she was depressed. She had some mental health issues, addictive problems. She jumped into the river above the falls near Dufferin Islands. But she changed her mind. She started waving her arms as she was being pushed towards the falls. And a cop, who's now the chief Parks Police, Paul Forshey, saw her and got out of the cruiser, but it was too late. She was trying to grab onto the island and stuff, and she went over the falls and sadly died. But that is, to me, is like the gun. Is there. It's there. You want the pain to be gone for a minute, And so I take some umbrage and I'm starting to take the Niagara Parks Commission and tourism officials to task on how easy it is to climb over that railing. It's not even 4 feet. You step on a step and then you only got 2 feet to go. So if you have these issues, and I've stood there like Robert Billings and thought, you know, I was on welfare in Niagara Falls when I first moved here, and I had a young family. I thought, boy, how easy it'd be to take that last step, and it's like a gun. You're gone. I'm going to read a bit from my book on safety measures about Niagara Falls. And the Parks Commission here is this, and never going to give me that statue of Red Hill Senior. But again, it's one of these things where you want business to come to the falls. And Bill Derbyshire, who was the former chief of the Parks Police, he said these people they're going to find a way to get into the river. They can go upstream and get into the river. Yeah, that's fine, but it doesn't have the allure of that spot right at Table Rock House. When you're at Table Rock House, you're looking down, and there it is, and mind it, you feel like it's pulling you. And you go in the upper river, there's a chance that you may be saved. Unfortunately, Katie Campbell wasn't saved, but I think I've misplaced that one. Anyway, that railing has got to be higher. What are you going to put? Plexiglass? This is my personal opinion. Plexiglass, something. It's the same on the American side. Not just blaming the Canadians, but it's just so easy to go over. And suicidologists, as they call themselves, they said the same thing. And to use an analogy, Golden Gate Bridge actually has had more suicides than Niagara Falls. They've taken steps. They've put a big net. I think it's finished now. They started about a year ago, and I think it's finished. So if you try to jump off the Golden Gate Bridge, you'll land in this net. And the reason people jump off Golden Gate Bridge is it's become like a suicide spot. It gets a lot of publicity. So they've taken procedures. They've taken some procedures at Niagara Falls. They had a payphone. They had a phone, not a payphone. They had a phone at Table Rock House. But they found I don't think it's there anymore. They found in the wintertime it was freezing up, and some tourists were picking up and ordering pizzas. So it was being misused. Even though there's a big sign there, you need help, please pick this up, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I think that's probably I'm going to say about the suicides.
There's one on the American side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is one there. And there are cameras on both sides, but it often is too late. You're at Table Rock House and you're on that railing, and it's all over. So I don't know. I haven't started a petition or anything like that, but with my book, I'm hoping to get something, and my documentary, I'm hoping to get some results on that. But again, it's like turning an ocean liner around. They always come back with, well, you can go in the river anywhere you want, but it's not so easy there as in the Table Rock House. I think that's pretty much. Is there any questions beyond this? Anything coming out of what I said?
I have a question.
Okay.
In Niagara Falls downtown, we have a lane between Queen and Huron.
Sorry.
We
Okay.
have a laneway
Huron Street.
Queen and Huron, and it's called Daredevil Alley. And it's a mural of all the daredevils.
Oh, you're kidding. You know what? Believe it or not, I haven't seen that.
You haven't seen it?
I don't live in Niagara Falls.
Well, you should go.
Yeah, you should go check it out.
Should we be interested if you think that it's correct historically or your opinion? But
It's on the side of a building, is it?
yeah, it's a big mural, right, Shelley?
Yeah. So the question for people online that maybe didn't hear was about Daredevil Alley, which is just off Queen Street, near what side street? Ontario. On the south side of Queen Street, near Ontario Street, and it has billboards down it of all of the famous or infamous daredevils from the area. You should definitely check it out.
Maybe it's nobody goes down there.
Yeah.
Oh, we got to get people down there.
At the end of it, there's a wheelbarrow. Is that how you call it? And you put your head in it.
Yeah.
You get your
It's like a
picture taken in the
facial.
barrel.
The barrel, yeah.
The barrel, not a wheelbarrow. The barrel.
The barrel.
Melissa,
Going
is there-
over the falls.
Yeah. Melissa, is there anything else you can add? Like, what it was like being a woman in the Hill family.
It was scary. That's
Scary.
how I can remember from my mom talking. They'd be sitting at dinner, and all of a sudden, my grandfather would jump up and say, "Something's happening," and he'd be gone. And somebody had gone over the falls or
Yes.
boat too. He seemed to have a sixth sense about it. But it was scary because they didn't know what he was going to do. You know, when he get into trouble,
Yes.
trying to help somebody else.
Melissa's mother, Edith, was actually offered money by a corporation to become a female daredevil, but she never took them up on it. She said to me, she gave me many interviews, she was kind of a tomboy, but she didn't want to go that far.
Yeah.
What do you want to call it a night, or you want me to give you?
Yeah, no, I have one question, and
Okay.
I don't know, maybe you can answer it, or maybe Patrick knows.
Google it.
I could, but I mean, I think it might be of interest. One of the things that they talk about with that, and you were mentioning it, the draw of the falls, something to do with the ions or some capacity of the water chemistry that actually draws people to the falls. Does anybody know what I'm talking
There
about?
was a story about 25 years ago about that. A scientist in the eons, is it? Something in the water.
Ions.
It's always something in the water, right? I don't think it was sort of a sexy headline for a while, but I don't think
But no,
anything was
there's
proven
nothing.
about it.
A few reports in old copies of the Niagara Falls Gazette where people had actually walked into the upper rapids above the American Falls, been rescued, but don't remember walking into the rapids and had no tendency towards suicide or anything.
Wow.
Did you just set this up for me, Patrick? Because I got this case right here. Here it is. It's the last day of summer, 1946. Ellen King, a tourist from Toronto and recent immigrant from Ireland, hears the voice of the American Falls, loud and clear, directly talking to her. As she walks along the shoreline, Ellen's legs get weak. Suddenly, without explanation or thought, she is knee-deep in the water, and it's ready to knock her off her feet, several hundred yards from the brink. She's trapped in the channel leading up to the falls between Prospect Point and Terrapin Point, a stretch of white rapids known as Devil's Half Acre on the American side. Ellen screams loud and long, throws up her hands, and collapses unconscious in the water. Nearby, just above on the Goat Island Bridge, 22-year-old honeymooners George and Helen Bowers have been holding hands for the final time of their honeymoon week before going home to Baltimore. Sweet wedding bells still ringing in their heads. But when George hears help in an Irish brogue, he takes flight. Mrs. King is thrashing in the fast water, 30 feet from the bridge and 100 feet from shore. Bowers, a former Navy petty officer, fresh out of World War II, scrambles off the bridge and wades into Devil's Half Acre. As he reaches and latches onto Helen, the rapids pick up speed and bite their ankles. She regains at least semi-consciousness and stands up, wobbly, her blue eyes flickering. One false step on a slippery rock, and they're both heading over the falls onto its deathbed of big, hideous boulders. Here's what she said: "I had no reason to attempt anything like that." Later at home, she told a Globe and Mail reporter that Niagara Falls always held a fascination for her. "I was walking along the bank near the upper rapids on the American side when I began to feel dizzy. The roar of the water became overpowering. It seemed to be drawing and inviting me in, and then everything went blank. I remembered nothing until I woke up in hospital hours later and the nurses told me what had happened. You know, I've crossed the ocean 4 times, but it didn't affect me that way. Neither does Lake Ontario. It isn't exactly the water that draws me, it's the sound of the rapids, the great roaring that comes louder and louder in my ears." She said she would visit Niagara Falls again, but I guess I'll just have to watch myself. Thanks, Patrick. It's a good setup. Anyway, thank you very much. You've been a wonderful crowd. If there's any other questions, take them. Yes. Thank you for coming out in this COVID season.
Does anybody have any other questions?
I learned something tonight. Thank you. Came here to learn something.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay.
That was fabulous as always. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you for the folks that came out to sit on the lawn. We hope you have a wonderful night. This Sunday we have Emily Williams, Miss M, playing music on the porch from 1 to 4. And next week we have Eve Adams doing the final stories from the porch for the summer. Have a great night.